The organ music faltered like a stumbling heartbeat, and every head in the cathedral turned at once. Seraphine Voss stood at the altar, in a gown she had spent 4 months saving for, her fingers clutching a bouquet of white camellias so tightly the stems were bruising beneath her gloves. She was supposed to be looking at Aldrich Ashcroft, the second son of the Duke of Thornhaven, the man who had courted her with laughter and poetry, and a smile that made her forget she was poor. The man who had promised her a life she never dared imagine. But Aldrich was not standing at the altar. His brother was. Caspian Ashcroft, the Duke of Thornhaven himself, stood where the groom should have been, his face carved from something harder than stone. He wore black, not the dove-gray morning suit Aldrich had chosen, but funeral black, as though he had come to bury something rather than celebrate it. His dark hair was swept back with severe precision, and his jaw was set in a line so rigid it looked like it might shatter if he spoke. He did not look at her. Not yet. The vicar had stopped mid-sentence, his mouth open around a word that would never arrive. Behind Seraphine, 300 guests rustled and whispered, like wind moving through dead leaves. She could feel their eyes, hundreds of them, crawling across her back, her dress, her frozen face. Where is Aldrich? The question screamed inside her skull, but her lips would not move. Her body had turned to marble. She stood there in her carefully altered wedding gown, the one her mother had resewn 3 times to make the lace sit properly, and she felt the exact moment her life split in 2. Everything before this second, and everything after. Caspian finally turned his head. His eyes met hers, and she felt the impact like a physical blow. They were gray, not the warm brown of Aldrich's, but the cold gray of winter rivers, of iron, of skies before storms. There was no apology in them, no warmth, no explanation, only certainty. "The ceremony will proceed," he said. His voice was low and measured, pitched to carry without shouting, the voice of a man accustomed to issuing commands that no one questioned. He was not asking permission. He was not requesting her consent. He was informing the cathedral of what was about to happen, the way one might announce a change in weather. Seraphine's bouquet trembled. A single camellia petal detached and drifted to the stone floor between them like a white flag of surrender she had not waved. "No," she whispered. The word came out so softly that only Caspian heard it. His gaze sharpened, and for the briefest moment, something flickered behind those iron eyes. Not guilt, not hesitation, something she could not name. "Miss Voss." His voice dropped lower, meant only for her now. "I understand this is not what you expected. But if you turn around and walk out of this cathedral, you will be ruined. Your family will be ruined, and Aldrich will still not be here." The cruelty of it stole her breath, not because it was unkind, but because it was true. 300 witnesses, half of London society seated in those carved pews. The invitations had gone out under the Ashcroft name, announcing the marriage of Miss Seraphine Voss to a son of the Duke of Thornhaven. No one would care which son. They would only care that she had been abandoned at the altar, and in the merciless arithmetic of society, that calculation would destroy her. "Where is he?" she managed, her voice cracking on the last word. "Gone." One word, no elaboration, no comfort. Gone where? That is a conversation for after the ceremony. Caspian extended his hand, palm up, steady as bedrock. You have approximately 30 seconds before the whispers become a scandal that follows you for the rest of your natural life. Take my hand, Miss Voss. Say your vows, and I will explain everything once we are alone. She stared at his outstretched hand, long fingers, no rings, a faint scar across one knuckle that she had never noticed before. This was not Aldrich's hand. Aldrich's hands were soft and expressive, always gesturing, always reaching for hers with easy warmth. This hand was still, patient, offering nothing beyond itself. Behind her, the whispers were swelling. She heard a woman gasp, heard the creak of pews as people leaned forward, hungry for catastrophe, heard her mother's quiet, strangled sound from the third row, the sound of a woman watching her daughter's life unravel in real time. Seraphine looked at Caspian Ashcroft, the brother she had met only once. At a dinner so formal and so silent, she had wondered if the man was capable of speech. The Duke who watched everything and revealed nothing. The man Aldrich had once described, laughing, as having all the warmth of a February frost. She took his hand. His fingers closed around hers with immediate, surprising firmness. Warm. His hand was warm. That single detail almost undid her, because she had expected cold, expected the touch to match the eyes. The vicar recovered with admirable speed, glancing between them with barely concealed alarm before finding his place in the liturgy. The ceremony continued, as if the groom had not been swapped out like a chess piece in the middle of a game neither player had agreed to play. Seraphine spoke her vows in a voice she did not recognize, steady, clear, betraying nothing of the chaos inside her chest. Years of her mother's training, years of performing composure in rooms where she did not belong, years of smiling through humiliation. It all paid off in this single, terrible performance. Caspian spoke his vows with the same measured precision he applied to everything. No tremor, no hesitation, no emotion whatsoever. When the vicar pronounced them husband and wife, Seraphine felt the words land on her shoulders like chains made of silk, beautiful and inescapable. "You may kiss the bride." Caspian leaned forward, and for one wild, vertiginous moment, Seraphine thought he might actually kiss her. Instead, his lips brushed her temple. Barely there, a ghost of contact that could have been a kiss or a whisper or nothing at all. His breath stirred her hair, and she heard him murmur 4 words so quiet they existed only between them. "I will fix this." Then he straightened, offered his arm, and led her back down the aisle through a cathedral full of stunned faces and thunderous applause that sounded, to Seraphine's ears, exactly like the roar of a building collapsing. 10 months earlier, Seraphine Voss had not known the Ashcroft brothers existed. She knew the name, of course. Everyone in England knew the Ashcroft name. The Dukes of Thornhaven had held their title for 9 generations, accumulating land, influence, and a reputation for cold pragmatism that made them respected and slightly feared in equal measure. But the Ashcrofts moved in spheres so far above hers that they might as well have been constellations, beautiful, distant, and entirely irrelevant to her daily life. Her daily life consisted of the following: rise at dawn, help her mother, Odette, with the household, walk to the draper's shop on Briar Lane, where she worked 6 days a week, measuring fabric, calculating costs, managing the ledger that the shop's aging owner could no longer read without squinting. Walk home, help with supper, read by candlelight until her eyes burned, sleep, repeat. Her father, Matthias Voss, had been a master watchmaker, the finest in the county, people said. His timepieces had graced the mantles of lords and merchants alike. But 3 years ago, his eyesight had begun to fail, slowly at first, then with devastating speed. A watchmaker who cannot see is a watchmaker who cannot work. The commissions dried up, the savings dwindled. They moved from their comfortable house on Wren Street to 2 rented rooms above a chandler's shop that smelled permanently of tallow and regret. Her brother, Torin, was 20, and reckless in the specific way of young men who believe that the world owes them a destiny grander than the one they were born into. He had fallen in with a crowd of ambitious schemers, chief among them a man named Piers Kavanagh, who always had a plan, a deal, a sure thing that never quite materialized. It was Piers who introduced Torin to Aldrich Ashcroft. And it was Aldrich who changed everything. He appeared at the draper's shop one Tuesday afternoon in April, asking for a specific shade of cobalt silk that they did not carry. He was charming in the effortless way of men who had never been denied anything. Handsome, well-dressed, quick to laugh, quicker to compliment. He complimented the shop's organization. He complimented the neatness of her ledger. He complimented the way she measured fabric, which no one had ever complimented before because it was not the sort of thing people noticed. He came back the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that. Within 2 weeks, he had asked permission to call on her at home. Within a month, he had met her parents. Within 6 weeks, he had declared his intentions so publicly and so enthusiastically that half of Briar Lane knew Seraphine Voss was being courted by an Ashcroft. Odette was cautious. Matthias was suspicious. Torin was ecstatic. Seraphine was terrified and thrilled in equal measure. Aldrich was everything she was not. Wealthy, connected, at ease in every room he entered. He moved through life like water, flowing around obstacles, filling whatever space he occupied with warmth and laughter. He told her she was beautiful. He told her she was clever. He told her she deserved more than a draper's shop and 2 rented rooms above a chandler. He told her he loved her on a Tuesday evening, standing in the rain outside her door, his hair plastered to his forehead, grinning like a man who had just discovered the secret to happiness and could not wait to share it. She believed him. Of course she believed him. He was impossible not to believe. The proposal came 2 months later, delivered with a ring that was modest by Ashcroft standards, but represented more money than Seraphine's family earned in a year. Aldrich explained that his brother, the Duke, had approved the match. Seraphine would be welcomed into the family. The wedding would be held at St. Albans Cathedral. Everything would be provided for. She met Caspian exactly once before the wedding. It was at a formal dinner at Thornhaven Hall, arranged so the families could become acquainted. Seraphine had expected warmth, or at least politeness. What she got was a man who looked at her as if she were an equation he was solving in his head. Caspian had said precisely 11 words to her to the entire evening. "Welcome, Miss Voss. I trust you had a comfortable journey." Then he had retreated to the far end of the table and spent the rest of the meal in silence, while Aldrich filled the room with enough charm for both of them. Afterward, as they left, Seraphine had asked Aldrich about his brother's coldness. "That is just Caspian," Aldrich had said, waving dismissively. "He has been like that since we were boys. Father's death made it worse. He carries the title like a penance instead of a privilege. Do not take it personally. He is like that with everyone." She had not taken it personally. She had simply filed Caspian Ashcroft away in the category of things she would tolerate for Aldrich's sake, like the Ashcroft family's formality, like the silent disapproval of their grandmother, like the knowledge that she would always be the merchant's daughter who married above her station. The wedding preparations consumed the next 4 months. Aldrich was involved in everything, choosing flowers, tasting cakes, debating invitation wordings with infectious enthusiasm. Seraphine threw herself into the details because the details kept her from thinking too hard about what she was walking into. 3 days before the wedding, Aldrich visited her for the last time. He was different. She noticed it immediately. The easy laughter was strained. His eyes kept darting to the door, as if he expected someone to walk through it. He held her hands too tightly and spoke too quickly about how everything would be wonderful, how she would love Thornhaven, how his brother would come around eventually. "Come around to what?" she had asked. "To us," Aldrich said, and kissed her forehead, and left. She did not hear from him again. The morning of the wedding, a letter arrived at the Voss household in handwriting she did not recognize. It was from Caspian. "Miss Voss, my brother will not be at the cathedral today. He has left England under circumstances I will explain at the appropriate time. I am prepared to offer you an alternative. Come to the cathedral. The ceremony will proceed. I will stand in my brother's place. You will become the Duchess of Thornhaven. Your family will be provided for. In return, I ask only your discretion and your patience. Yours, C. Ashcroft. Seraphine had read the letter 7 times. Her mother had found her sitting on the edge of her bed, staring at nothing, the letter crushed in her fist. He is offering you a lifeboat, Odette said quietly. The question is whether you trust the man steering it. I do not know him. You did not know Aldrich either. Not really. You knew what he showed you. That truth had landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples through every certainty Seraphine had built over the past 10 months. She went to the cathedral. She stood at the altar. She took Caspian's hand. And now here she was, in a carriage heading toward Thornhaven Hall, married to a man who had spoken fewer words to her in their entire acquaintance than Aldrich used to speak before breakfast. The carriage was silent. Caspian sat across from her, his posture rigid, his gaze fixed on the passing countryside. You promised me an explanation, Seraphine said finally. Aldrich has debts, significant ones. Gambling debts, accumulated over the past 2 years with increasing recklessness. He owes nearly £40,000 to creditors across London and Paris. Several of those creditors are not the sort of men who accept late payment graciously. He ran, she said. It was not a question. He ran. Took passage on a ship to the continent 3 days ago. Caspian's jaw tightened. He has been making promises to repay his debts since he was 16. Why did you do it? Why stand at the altar? You could have simply told me the truth, canceled the wedding, sent everyone home, and destroyed you in the process. 300 guests, half of London society, a jilted bride from a family already on the edge of financial ruin. The marriage protects your reputation, secures your family's position, and gives us time to manage the situation without public scandal. So this was charity. This was damage control. Aldrich created a catastrophe. I contained it. And what do you get? The question seemed to surprise him. His eyes studied her with that same calculating intensity she remembered from the dinner at Thornhaven. I get a wife I did not choose under circumstances I did not create. I assure you, Miss Voss, this arrangement benefits me least of all. It is Mrs. Ashcroft now, Seraphine said, and the words tasted like ash. Or have you forgotten we just exchanged vows? Thornhaven Hall rose from the Hampshire countryside like a monument to centuries of Ashcroft ambition. Pale stone, symmetrical wings, gardens manicured to within an inch of their lives. It looked exactly like its master. Controlled. Beautiful. Completely closed off. Mrs. Ashcroft will require the East Wing suite, Caspian told the housekeeper, a severe woman introduced as Mrs. Plymley. I will be in my study, Caspian said, already turning away. Mrs. Plymley will see to whatever you need. Wait. Seraphine's voice stopped him mid-stride. We are married. You owe me more than a housekeeper and a locked door. Dinner is at 8. We will talk then. He disappeared down a corridor, and Seraphine was left standing in the grand entrance hall of a house that was now technically hers, feeling more lost than she had ever felt in her life. The East Wing suite was larger than the entire Voss home. Seraphine stood in the center of the bedroom, turning slowly, trying to absorb the scale of it. A 4-poster bed with cream silk hangings. A dressing table with a mirror so clear it startled her. An adjoining sitting room with its own fireplace, its own writing desk, its own shelf of books arranged by height rather than subject. An enormous wardrobe that gaped open like a mouth, empty except for the traveling trunk Nella had sent ahead with her modest collection of dresses. Her dresses looked pitiful in there. 3 cotton day dresses, 1 wool dress for winter, and the wedding gown she was still wearing, which suddenly felt like a costume she needed to remove before it became her skin. A knock at the door brought a young woman with auburn hair and a spattering of freckles across her nose. "Mrs. Ashcroft? I am Nella. I have been assigned as your lady's maid." She curtsied with practiced ease. "Shall I help you change?" Seraphine almost laughed. A lady's maid. She had never had anyone help her dress in her life. "Yes," she said. "Please." Nella moved with quiet efficiency, unfastening the dozens of tiny buttons down Seraphine's back, helping her step out of the layers of silk and petticoat. As the wedding gown pooled on the floor, Seraphine felt something release in her chest. Not relief, exactly. More like the loosening of a knot she had been tying tighter and tighter all day. "I brought tea," Nella said, gesturing to a tray on the side table. "And Cook sent up sandwiches. She said you probably had not eaten." She had not. The morning had been too chaotic, too surreal for something as mundane as food. But now, standing in a borrowed dressing gown in a room that smelled of lavender and beeswax, hunger hit her like a wave. "Thank you," Seraphine said, and meant it with a depth that surprised her. She ate standing at the window, looking out over the grounds. The gardens gave way to parkland, which gave way to forest, which gave way to rolling green hills that seemed to stretch into forever. Somewhere out there, Aldrich was on a ship, sailing toward a new life while she navigated the ruins of the one he had promised her. She did not cry. She had cried enough in the carriage on the way to the cathedral, silently, so her mother would not see. Now she was done. Whatever came next, she would face it with her eyes dry and her spine straight. Dinner was at 8, Caspian had said. That gave her 4 hours to prepare herself for whatever conversation awaited. She spent those hours exploring. Not the whole house, that would take days, but the east wing and the corridors that connected it to the main rooms. Thornhaven was a labyrinth of hallways and closed doors, portraits and marble busts, rooms that seemed designed for purposes she could not guess. A music room with a grand piano covered in dust, a billiard room that smelled faintly of tobacco, a conservatory full of exotic plants that looked half abandoned, as though whoever had loved them was no longer here to tend them. She found the library by accident, drawn by the smell of old paper and leather. It was magnificent. 2 stories tall, with a gallery accessed by a wrought iron spiral staircase, shelves lining every wall, books packed so tightly they seemed to hold the house up. A fire burned low in the grate, and 2 leather chairs faced it. One obviously occupied recently. A book left open on the arm, a glass of something amber on the side table. Caspian's chair. She could tell by the rigid economy of the scene. Everything placed with deliberate precision. Nothing wasted, nothing decorative, nothing for comfort beyond the absolute minimum. She was examining the shelves when a voice behind her made her jump. "You found the library." "Good. It is the only room in this house worth spending time in." The voice did not belong to Caspian. Seraphine turned to find a woman standing in the doorway. She was tall, silver-haired, dressed in deep purple velvet that made her look like a queen in exile. Her face was striking rather than beautiful, all angles and authority, with eyes the same unsettling gray as Caspian's. She leaned on an ebony walking stick, not from weakness, but as if she simply preferred to have a weapon within reach. "I am Lisette Ashcroft, Caspian's grandmother. Sit down, girl. Tell me everything." Seraphine remained standing. "With respect, I know very little myself." "Then tell me what you know, and I will fill in the gaps my grandson is no doubt too proud to address." She sat. "I know that Aldrich left," Seraphine began carefully, "that he has significant debts, that Caspian intercepted me before the wedding with a letter offering to take his place, that I accepted, because the alternative was public ruin for my family. And how do you feel about all of that? The question was so blunt it almost made her laugh. Furious, humiliated, frightened, grateful, confused, roughly in that order. Lisette studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Good. A stupid woman would feel only one of those things. You feel all of them, which tells me you are at least intelligent enough to understand the situation you are in. She tapped her walking stick against the floor once, a punctuation mark. Now let me tell you what my grandson will not. Seraphine waited. Caspian did not do this for you. Lisette's voice was matter-of-fact, not cruel, simply precise. He did it for the family name. But there is more. She leaned forward, her gray eyes sharp. Caspian has spent the last 3 years cleaning up his brother's messes. Every gambling debt, every broken promise, every young woman Aldrich charmed and discarded, all while running the estates and grieving a father he lost without warning. Seraphine's chest tightened. His father, Randolph Ashcroft, died of a seizure 14 months ago, alone in this very library, while Caspian was in Edinburgh settling one of Aldrich's previous disasters. He arrived home to find his father already cold. Lisette's voice did not waver, but her knuckles whitened on the walking stick. He has not forgiven himself for being absent. The portrait above the fireplace drew Seraphine's gaze, a man with Caspian's jaw and Aldrich's warmth in his eyes. That is Randolph, the best of them. He married for love, a woman this family considered beneath him. Sound familiar? Seraphine met the dowager's eyes. I didn't marry Caspian for love. No, you married him because you had no choice, which is worse in some ways. Lisette stood, gripping her walking stick with both hands. Here is what I need you to understand, Mrs. Ashcroft. My grandson is not a cruel man, but he is a closed one. His father's death broke something in him that was already fragile. He functions. He manages. He performs his duties with mechanical perfection. But he is not living. He is merely continuing. Why are you telling me this? Because you are his wife now, whether either of you wanted it, and because you are the first variable in his carefully controlled life that he did not plan for. Lisette moved toward the door, then paused. I am not asking you to love him. I am not even asking you to like him. I am asking you not to make things worse. He has had enough of that from Aldrich. And if he makes things worse for me? Lisette turned back, something like respect flickering in her expression. Then you come to me. I may be old, but I am not without influence, and I do not tolerate cruelty, not even from my own blood. She left, and Seraphine sat alone in the library, surrounded by centuries of Ashcroft history and the weight of a marriage she had never planned, to a man she did not know, in a life she had not chosen. Dinner was formal. Silver, crystal, candles, enough cutlery for 6 courses. Caspian sat at the head of a table designed for 20. Lisette watched them both like a chess master studying the board. You met my grandmother, Caspian said finally. She told me everything you intended to tell me yourself, I imagine. She told me your father died while you were cleaning up Aldrich's mess. She told me you blame yourself. She told me you are closed off and functioning rather than living. Seraphine set down her fork. She also told me not to make things worse, which I found interesting, given that I am the one who was abandoned at the altar this morning. Caspian's expression stiffened. My grandmother is direct. Your grandmother is honest. I prefer it to silence. Very well. What would you like to know? Everything. Start with the rules. Publicly, they were husband and wife. They would attend events together. The narrative was simple. Privately, separate lives. East Wing, and west. "How long?" Seraphine asked. "I do not have an answer. The situation with Aldrich is fluid." "You are telling me that my entire future is contingent on your brother's gambling debts and his willingness to come home. It is not complicated for me." She stood. "I am the one who lost everything today. My intended husband, my choice, my autonomy. You may have saved my reputation, your grace, but you didn't save me. You simply changed the shape of the cage." She left the dining room before he could respond. Behind her, she heard Lisette's voice, low and pointed. "Well, she has spine. That is something, at least." The next morning, Lisette laid siege to Seraphine's transformation, a schedule covering the next 6 weeks, morning instruction in household management, afternoon fittings with a dressmaker arriving from London, evening practice in conversation, dance, and social navigation. "You have precisely 8 weeks before the Kendrick Ball, which will be your first public appearance as Duchess of Thornhaven. Every person in that ballroom will be watching you, judging you, deciding whether you are worthy or whether you are Caspian's mistake." Lisette's voice sharpened. "I will not allow you to be his mistake." Madame Renaud arrived with 3 assistants, a trunk of fabric samples, and the kind of imperious French accent that could make a compliment sound like a declaration of war. "She has good shoulders. But the posture, non. We must fix the posture. You carry yourself like someone who is apologizing for being in the room. A duchess does not apologize for space. A duchess claims it." Over the next weeks, Seraphine was transformed, not in the sudden, magical way of fairy tales, but in the slow, grueling way of actual work. Lisette drilled her in etiquette, in the art of saying nothing while appearing to say everything. Madame Renaud built her a wardrobe that made her feel armored rather than adorned. Nella taught her the rhythms of the household, and Caspian himself remained a ghost. He appeared at meals, ate in silence, responded to direct questions with the minimum number of words, and retreated to his study or the library the moment propriety allowed. He never sought her out. He never asked how her training was progressing. He acknowledged her existence with the same polite distance he might afford a visiting diplomat, cordial, correct, and entirely walled off. It should not have bothered her. This was the arrangement they had agreed to. Separate lives, shared name, nothing more. But it did bother her. Not because she wanted his attention, she told herself, but because his absence was its own kind of presence. The empty chair at breakfast, the closed study door she passed 6 times a day, the sound of his footsteps in the West Wing late at night, pacing, always pacing, as though the house itself could not contain whatever he carried inside him. She was starting to understand what Lisette had meant. Functioning, but not living. Present, but not here. And despite every rational instinct telling her to maintain her distance, to treat this arrangement as the transaction it was, Seraphine found herself wondering what it would take to make the Duke of Thornhaven stop pacing. Then she pushed the thought away. This was temporary. An arrangement. Nothing more. She repeated it like armor as Madame Renaud pinned the hem of her ball gown, and Lisette recited the guest list for the Kendrick Ball from memory. Nothing more. The library became their accidental meeting place. Seraphine did not plan it. She simply found herself drawn there each evening after dinner, pulled by the smell of old leather and the promise of silence that felt different from the silence in the rest of the house. The silence in the corridors was cold, institutional, the silence of a building that had forgotten what laughter sounded like. But the library's silence was warm, layered with the ghosts of all the words trapped inside its thousands of volumes, waiting to be released. She would settle into the chair that was not Caspian's, tuck her feet beneath her, and read. Lisette's schedule left her exhausted by evening, body sore from posture drills, mind buzzing from memorizing family trees and social hierarchies. Reading was the only thing that quieted the noise. On the fourth night, Caspian was already there. He sat in his usual chair, ledgers spread across his lap, a pen moving in sharp, efficient strokes across a column of figures. He glanced up when she entered, and for a moment, the air between them held its breath. "I can find another room," Seraphine said. "There are 43 rooms in this house. This is the only one with adequate reading light at this hour." He returned his attention to the ledgers. "Stay if you wish." It was not an invitation. It was not a dismissal. It was simply a statement of fact delivered in that flat, controlled voice she was beginning to recognize as Caspian's version of neutral. Not cold, she was realizing, though it sounded cold, just guarded. Every word measured and weighed before it was released, as though language itself were a resource he could not afford to waste. She sat. She read. He worked. For 3 nights, that was the entirety of their interaction. 2 people sharing a room without sharing anything else. Seraphine read her way through a volume of Keats, then moved to a biography of Catherine the Great, then found an unexpected collection of botanical illustrations that someone had annotated with careful, beautiful handwriting. "Those are my mother's," Caspian said on the 3rd night, without looking up. Seraphine paused, her fingers hovering over a delicate sketch of a foxglove. "Your mother drew these?" "She was an accomplished botanist before she married my father. She used to spend hours in the conservatory, cataloging everything that grew there." The conservatory, the half-abandoned room full of exotic plants she had found on her first day. "No one tends it anymore," she said. It was not a question. "No." His pen stopped moving. "After she died, Father could not bear to go in there. And after Father died, I saw no reason to start." The admission was small, but it was the first piece of himself he had offered freely. Seraphine handled it carefully, the way she would handle a rare and fragile thing. "The plants are still alive," she said. "Some of them, at least. They have been surviving on their own for quite some time." Caspian looked at her. Then, really looked at her, and she saw something behind those gray eyes that was not calculation or control. It was surprise, as if the idea that something could survive neglect and still live had not occurred to him. "I suppose some things are resilient," he said quietly. "Most things are, if you give them reason to be." The silence that followed was different from any they had shared before. Softer, less defended. She returned to the botanical illustrations, and he returned to his ledgers. But something had shifted in the room's geometry, as though the distance between their 2 chairs had contracted by an imperceptible degree. The next evening, he spoke first. "You are reading very quickly," he observed. "You have gone through 4 volumes in as many days. I grew up reading by candlelight after work. When you only have an hour, you learn to read fast. What was your favorite, before all this?" The question was casual, almost throwaway, but Seraphine recognized it for what it was. The first question he had asked about her life, rather than her circumstances. Not "what do you need?" or "what are the terms?" but "what do you love?" "Jane Austen," she said. Specifically persuasion. The idea that someone could be convinced to give up the right person and then spend years regretting it, and then get a second chance despite everything. She paused. "I suppose I liked the idea that it is never too late to correct a mistake." Caspian was quiet for a long moment. "I have not read Austen." "That is a correctable mistake." Something happened to his face. It took her a moment to identify it because she had never seen it before. The corner of his mouth moved, upward, fractionally, barely visible, gone almost before it registered. But it was there. Caspian Ashcroft had almost smiled. "There is a copy on the third shelf," he said. "Second row from the top. My mother's, I believe." "Then I will read it again in her honor." She retrieved the book and settled back into her chair, and they read in companionable silence until the fire burned low and the candles guttered. When she finally rose to leave, Caspian spoke without looking up. "Good night, Mrs. Ashcroft." It was the first time her married name had sounded like anything other than a contractual obligation. "Good night, Your Grace." She climbed the stairs to the east wing with a strange warmth in her chest that she refused to examine too closely. The days took on a rhythm. Evenings in the library with Caspian, where conversation grew like ivy. Slowly, persistently, covering more ground each night. He told her about the estates with a quiet passion that surfaced when he forgot to suppress it. He knew every tenant by name, every struggling farm, every roof that needed repair. "You care about them," Seraphine said. "They depend on me. That is not the same as caring." "It is, though. You just do not want to call it that." One evening, she stopped holding back. "You work until midnight, because sleeping means dreaming, and dreaming means feeling, and feeling is the thing you have decided you cannot afford. You pace the West Wing because your body has energy your mind will not let you use. And you sit in this library every night, not because you need the reading light, but because this room is where your father sat, and being here is the closest you allow yourself to grieving him." The silence that followed was absolute. Seraphine's heart hammered. She had gone too far. She knew she had gone too far, but something in her could not bear another evening of carefully maintained distance when the truth was sitting right there between them, obvious and unspoken. Caspian set down his pen. His hand was not quite steady. "Who told you about the pacing?" "No one told me. I hear you. Every night. The floorboards in the West Wing creak." He stared at her, and for the first time since she had known him, the mask cracked. Not completely, not dramatically, but a fracture appeared, hairline thin, and through it, she glimpsed something raw and unguarded and desperately alone. "You should not concern yourself with my habits," he said, but his voice had lost its edge. "We share a house and a name. Your habits are my concern, whether either of us likes it." He looked away, toward the fire, and Seraphine watched the flames reflect in his eyes and wondered if she had just built a bridge or burned one. "My father used to read aloud in this room," he said suddenly, "every evening after supper. Poetry, mostly. He had a terrible voice for it, too dramatic, too theatrical. Aldrich would laugh. Mother would pretend to critique his delivery, while obviously adoring every word. I would sit in the corner and pretend to study while listening to every syllable." It was the most he had ever said at once. Seraphine held perfectly still, afraid that any movement would remind him of his audience and seal the crack shut again. "He stopped reading aloud after Mother died," Caspian continued. "The room went quiet, and then when he died, it went silent." "There is a difference between quiet and silent, Mrs. Ashcroft. Quiet is the absence of noise. Silent is the absence of life. Which is it now?" she whispered. He looked at her, and the fracture in his mask widened. "I am not sure anymore." She did not push further. She simply picked up the copy of Persuasion, opened it, and began to read aloud. Her voice was nothing like his father's, she was sure. Not dramatic, not theatrical, just steady and clear, filling the silent room with words about second chances and the courage to reclaim what had been lost. Caspian did not tell her to stop. He closed his ledgers, leaned back in his chair, and listened. When she glanced at him 20 minutes later, his eyes were closed, not sleeping. just listening, with an expression she had never seen before. Something dangerously close to peace. She read until her voice grew hoarse, then marked the page and set the book aside. "Thank you," he said, without opening his eyes. She left before she could say something foolish. The Kendrick ball arrived like a verdict. Seraphine stood before the mirror in a gown of midnight blue silk, with silver thread embroidered along the bodice like scattered stars. Lisette had produced hairpins from a velvet box, murmuring that they had belonged to Caspian's mother and were now hers by right. "You look like a duchess," Nella said, her eyes bright. "I look like someone pretending to be a duchess." That is the same thing. Every duchess in history was pretending at first. Caspian waited in the entrance hall. He did not compliment her. His gaze moved over her once, returned to her face, and held there for exactly 2 seconds longer than propriety permitted. "The carriage is ready," he said. Lisette caught Seraphine's arm as they walked toward the door and whispered, "That is his version of speechless, darling. Take the victory." The Kendrick estate blazed with light. Introductions blurred together. Lord and Lady Kendrick, the terrifying Marchioness of Whitfield, Sir Marcus Hale, who proclaimed her a breath of fresh air in a stale room. And then Lady Philippa Graves appeared. She was golden. That was the first thing Seraphine noticed. Golden hair, golden gown, golden jewelry that cascaded from her throat like molten treasure. She was beautiful the way a blade is beautiful, precise and gleaming and designed for a specific purpose. "Your Grace," Lady Philippa said, curtsying to Caspian with practiced elegance. "What a pleasure. I had heard you were bringing your new wife. How delightful that the rumors were true." Her voice made the word wife sound like a temporary condition. "Lady Philippa," Caspian acknowledged, his tone neutral. "May I present Mrs. Ashcroft?" "Of course." Lady Philippa turned to Seraphine with a smile that showed every tooth. "We have all been so curious about you, Mrs. Ashcroft. The circumstances of your marriage were rather, how shall I put it, unexpected." "All the best things are unexpected," Seraphine replied. "I find predictability rather dull." Lady Philippa's smile tightened. "How charming. And where did you say your family was situated?" "I did not say. But since you ask, my father is a master watchmaker. My mother keeps our household. We are not grand, Lady Philippa, but we are honest, which I find is rarer than grandeur in most company." The silence around them was electric. Several nearby conversations had stopped. Lady Philippa's golden facade flickered, and for an instant, something cold and appraising surfaced beneath the charm. "A watchmaker," she repeated. "How quaint." "Quaint and precise," Seraphine said steadily. "My father taught me that the smallest mechanisms hold the greatest power. A single misaligned gear can stop an entire clock. I find the principle applies rather well to social gatherings." Lady Philippa stared at her. Then she laughed, a bright, performative sound that carried across the ballroom like a bell. "What a delightful creature you are. Your Grace, wherever did you find her?" "Mrs. Ashcroft found me," Caspian said, and something in his voice made Seraphine's breath catch. Not warmth, exactly, but possession. Quiet, unmistakable possession. The tone of a man placing his hand on something and declaring it his. Lady Philippa registered it too, her golden smile dimmed by a fraction. How romantic. "Well, I do hope you will save me a dance later, Your Grace. For old time's sake." She glided away, and Seraphine released a breath she did not realize she had been holding. "Old times?" she asked quietly. "Lady Philippa was my grandmother's preferred match for me, before Aldrich complicated matters." Caspian guided her toward the dance floor. "She is persistent, well-connected, and entirely accustomed to getting what she wants. She sounds like your grandmother." There are similarities, though my grandmother has the advantage of being family, which limits the damage she can inflict. The orchestra began a waltz. Caspian offered his hand, and Seraphine took it, remembering her lessons with the dance instructor Lisette had hired, a patient woman named Mrs. Corbin, who had spent 3 weeks convincing Seraphine that waltzing was conversation set to music. But this was nothing like practice. Caspian danced the way he did everything, with controlled precision and an economy of movement that somehow made every step feel intentional. His hand at her waist was firm, but not restrictive. His lead was clear without being forceful, and his eyes stayed on hers, unwavering, as they moved across the floor. "Everyone is watching," she murmured. "They have been watching since we arrived. This simply gives them something worth seeing." And what are they seeing? A duke who chose his wife. His voice was quiet enough that only she could hear. That is the story we are telling tonight. Not an arrangement. Not a compromise. A choice. The words settled into her chest like stones into still water. "Is that the truth?" she asked before she could stop herself. He did not answer, but his hand tightened at her waist, drawing her imperceptibly closer, and the space between them narrowed to something that felt neither safe nor accidental. The waltz ended. Caspian released her with careful formality, and the moment was over. But Seraphine carried the imprint of his hand at her waist for the rest of the evening, a warmth that would not fade, no matter how many other partners she danced with. She danced with Sir Marcus, who told amusing stories. She danced with Lord Kendrick's eldest son, who stepped on her feet twice. She danced with a handsome earl, whose name she immediately forgot, because she spent the entire waltz watching Caspian across the room. He was watching her, too. She caught him twice, his gaze finding her through the crowd with an intensity that made the candlelit ballroom feel suddenly very small. Lady Philippa intercepted her near the refreshment table with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "You dance well for someone who learned recently. I want you to know I bear you no ill will. Whatever arrangement you have with the Duke, I am sure it serves its purpose. But purposes change, do they not? And when this particular purpose has run its course, well," she gestured vaguely with her champagne glass, "the Duke will still need a suitable partner, someone who understands his world. You are very confident, Lady Philippa, for someone standing on the outside of a marriage looking in. Am I on the outside?" Lady Philippa tilted her head. "Or are you?" She drifted away, leaving the question hanging in the air. Seraphine set down the untouched champagne and went to find Lisette, who was holding court in a corner with 3 other dowagers, all of them watching the room with the predatory attention of hawks circling a field. "Lady Philippa just told me my marriage has an expiration date," Seraphine said quietly. Lisette's expression did not change. "Lady Philippa tells everyone what she thinks they need to hear in order to feel small. It is her primary talent. She tapped her cane once. Did you feel small? No. I felt angry. Good. Anger is useful. Smallness is not." Lisette studied her for a moment. "My grandson danced with you tonight, the way his father used to dance with his mother. I doubt he realizes it. But I noticed, and I promise you, half this room noticed as well." Seraphine did not know what to do with that information, so she filed it away alongside Caspian's almost smile, his warm hand, and the 4 words he had murmured at their wedding. "I will fix this." She was beginning to wonder if he had meant more than the scandal. The morning after the Kendrick ball, something changed. When Seraphine came down to breakfast, Caspian was there, not finishing early and leaving as he usually did. Sitting with tea and the morning papers, as if he had been waiting. "The papers are reporting on the ball," he said, sliding a folded broadsheet across the table. Page 4. The review was favorable. The Duchess had commanded attention. The Duke had been notably attentive. Lady Philippa's exchange with the new Duchess was described as polite rather than warm. Polite rather than warm, Seraphine repeated. That is one way to describe being told my marriage has an expiration date. Caspian's voice dropped dangerously low. She said that to you. She implied it, rather skillfully. I will speak to her. You will not. If you intervene, it confirms that I cannot handle her myself, which is exactly what she wants people to believe. He studied her, then nodded slowly. You are right. I apologize. You apologize frequently for someone who rarely does anything wrong. Force of habit. Aldrich created situations. I apologized for them. The pattern is apparently difficult to break. It was the most casual, the most human he had ever sounded. Seraphine looked at him across the breakfast table and realized with a start that she was comfortable. Not performing comfort. Not manufacturing ease. Actually, genuinely comfortable in the presence of a man she had married under duress 10 weeks ago. The realization frightened her. In the days that followed, the distance between them continued to contract, not in large, dramatic gestures, but in small, accumulating ones. Caspian began joining her in the library earlier, arriving before she did, his chair angled slightly toward hers instead of facing the fire. He asked about her reading. He commented on the weather. He told her, haltingly, about a tenant farmer whose roof had collapsed and the arrangements he was making to rebuild it. These were not intimate conversations. They were the mundane exchanges of two people sharing a life, the kind of talk that happens between breakfast and bedtime in ordinary households across England. But for Caspian, who had spent so long in self-imposed silence, they were extraordinary. Seraphine began reading aloud every evening. It became their ritual, unspoken and unacknowledged, but as fixed as the stars. She read Persuasion first, then moved to Wordsworth, then to a collection of essays by a naturalist whose name she could not pronounce, but whose observations about the patience of trees made Caspian close his eyes and listen with that expression of reluctant peace. One evening, she arrived at the library to find a book on her chair, a slim volume bound in green Morocco leather, its spine lettered in gold. She opened it and found an inscription on the first page, in a hand she recognized as Caspian's. For evenings that are no longer silent. See. It was a collection of poetry by a writer she had never heard of. The poems were beautiful, spare, precise, full of images of coastlines and empty rooms and the specific quality of light at dawn. She read 3 of them aloud while Caspian pretended to work on his ledgers, and when she finished the 3rd, she looked up to find him watching her with an expression that made her heart stammer. "Thank you," she said. "This is beautiful." "You are welcome." Why this poet? I have never encountered him before. He wrote about solitude, about the difference between being alone by circumstance and being alone by choice. Caspian paused. I used to find comfort in his work. Recently, I find I need it less. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning neither of them was ready to name. Seraphine opened her mouth to respond, but the library door burst open, shattering the moment like a stone through glass. Torrin Voss stood in the doorway, travel-stained and breathless. "Seraphine, it is Aldrich. He has written to me. He is in Calais. He wants to come back. He wants to see you." The room went very still. Seraphine felt the blood drain from her face. She looked at Caspian, whose expression had turned to granite. Every trace of the man who had given her poetry moments ago vanished behind an impenetrable wall. "He has no right to see my wife." The words came out of Caspian with a force that surprised all 3 of them. Torrin produced a crumpled letter. "He asked me to give you this. Seraphine took the letter, but did not open it. "Leave us," Caspian said to Torin. It was not a request. Torin retreated from the library, closing the door behind him. The silence was excruciating. "You should read it," Caspian said finally. "Not tonight." Seraphine. It was the first time he had used her given name. Not Mrs. Ashcroft. Not Miss Voss. Seraphine. The sound of it in his voice, low and rough and stripped of every defense, almost broke her. "Whatever that letter says," he continued, each word measured, "it doesn't change the legal reality. You are married to me, not to Aldrich. Whatever he wants, whatever he thinks he deserves, that fact is immutable. Is that what concerns you? The legal reality?" He flinched. It was small, barely visible, but she saw it. The first time she had ever seen Caspian Ashcroft flinch. "What concerns me," he said carefully, "is that not long ago you were in love with my brother, and I need to know if that has changed." The question was so raw, so uncharacteristically vulnerable, that Seraphine felt tears prick her eyes. Not from sadness, from the sheer, overwhelming weight of everything she felt and could not say. "I do not know what I felt for Aldrich," she said honestly. "I thought it was love. But love does not abandon you at an altar and flee the country. Love does not leave someone else to clean up the wreckage." "That does not answer my question." "No, it doesn't." She stood, pressing the unopened letter against her chest. "Because the honest answer is more complicated than either of us is ready for right now. And I will not lie to you, Caspian. You deserve better than another person in your life who lies." She left the library, and the door closed between them like a period at the end of a sentence that was not yet finished. She read Aldrich's letter alone in her room, by candlelight, with her hands shaking. "My dearest Seraphine, I know you must hate me. But I need you to understand that my leaving was not cowardice alone. There were threats, debts owed to men who would have harmed you and your family if I remained. I left to protect you. I know Caspian has taken my place. I do not ask you to leave him. I ask only for the chance to explain in person. I have loved you from the moment I walked into that draper's shop. I love you still. Please grant me one conversation. Yours, always and forever, Aldrich." Seraphine read it 3 times. Then she folded it carefully, placed it in the drawer of her writing desk, and pressed her forehead against the cool wood. He had loved her. He still loved her. He had left to protect her, or so he claimed. The girl she had been 10 months ago would have believed every word, would have wept with relief, would have run to meet him with open arms and forgiven everything, because Aldrich's charm was a river that swept away reason and replaced it with feeling. But she was not that girl anymore. Her time in this house had changed her. Lisette's training had sharpened her instincts. Caspian's quiet integrity had recalibrated her understanding of what reliability looked like, and the suspicion that Aldrich's letter was more performance than truth sat in her gut like a stone. She did not sleep that night. She lay in the dark, listening to the distant creak of floorboards from the west wing, and knew that Caspian was not sleeping either. 3 days passed in unbearable tension. Caspian retreated behind his walls, with the finality of a drawbridge being raised. Meals became silent again. The library evenings stopped. He was functioning, managing, performing his duties with mechanical perfection, exactly as Lisette had warned. Seraphine felt the loss like a physical ache. The fragile thing they had been building, word by word, evening by evening, had been shattered by a single letter from a man who was not even in the country yet. On the 4th morning, Lisette summoned her to the morning room. "Sit," the dowager commanded, "and tell me why my grandson looks like a man attending his own funeral." "Aldrich has written. He wants to come back." Lisette's expression did not change, but her knuckles whitened on her cane. Of course he does. The money has run out and the adventure has soured. That is Aldrich's pattern. Flee, fail, return. Charm everyone into forgiving him, repeat. He says he left to protect me, that there were threats. There are always threats when you owe 40,000 pounds to dangerous men. That does not make fleeing heroic. It makes it the only option left after every other option has been squandered. Lisette leaned forward. What did Caspian say? He asked me if I was still in love with Aldrich. And? I could not answer him. Lisette studied her for a long, uncomfortable moment. Could not, or would not. Seraphine met the older woman's gaze. Both, because the truth is that I don't know what I feel. Not long ago, I was going to marry Aldrich. I thought he was my future. Now I am married to Caspian, living in his house, reading him poetry in his library. And I? She stopped, pressing her hands against her face. This was not supposed to happen. This was supposed to be an arrangement. Arrangements have a habit of becoming something else when two intelligent people are locked in a house together with nothing but honesty and proximity. Lisette's voice softened by a fraction. Answer me one question, and answer it truthfully. When you imagine Aldrich walking through that door, what do you feel? Seraphine considered. Anger, confusion, and fear. Fear of what? That he will be charming, that he will be convincing, that some part of me will want to believe him, and believing him will mean losing whatever it is that Caspian and I have started to build. Lisette set down her cane and took both of Seraphine's hands in hers. The gesture was so unexpected, so uncharacteristically tender, that Seraphine almost cried. Then you have your answer, Lisette said quietly. You are not afraid of Aldrich. You are afraid of losing Caspian. Those are very different fears, child, and only one of them matters. That evening, Seraphine went to the library. Caspian was not there. His chair was empty, his ledgers untouched. The fire had not been lit. She lit it herself. She sat in her chair. She opened the slim green volume of poetry and waited. He did not come. She waited until midnight, reading the same poem over and over, the one about the difference between being alone by circumstance and being alone by choice. When the fire burned to embers and the house fell silent around her, she placed the book on his chair, opened to the page she had been reading, and left a note in the margin in her own handwriting. I choose not to be alone. Do you? Then she went upstairs and waited for the creak of floorboards that would tell her he had found it. At 1:30 in the morning, the pacing in the West Wing stopped. Aldrich arrived on a Thursday. He did not send word ahead. He simply appeared at the gates of Thornhaven Hall in a hired carriage, travel-worn and thinner than Seraphine remembered, with a bouquet of white camellias that made her stomach lurch with recognition. The same flowers she had carried at the wedding. Seraphine was in the morning room with Lisette when she heard the front door open, and a voice she had not heard since before her wedding filled the entrance hall. Brother, you look well, and rather more married than when I left. She reached the entrance hall as Caspian descended the main staircase. Aldrich stood in the center of the marble floor, the camellias drooping in his hand, his smile bright and brittle, and aimed at his brother like a shield. Aldrich. Caspian's voice could have frozen a river. You were not invited. I have come to make amends, brother, to apologize, to explain. You abandoned your bride at the altar. You fled the country with 40,000 pounds in unpaid debts. What could you possibly explain that would count for anything? Then Aldrich's gaze found Seraphine, and the performer vanished. What remained looked like genuine pain. Seraphine, you look beautiful. I know I do not deserve to speak to you, but if you will give me 1 hour, I can explain everything." "One conversation," she said, "in the morning room, with the door open." Lisette warned Aldrich flatly, "If you upset this household further, I will make certain you never inherit so much as a candlestick." Aldrich sat. The charm fell away completely. What remained was a man who looked tired and scared, and very, very young. He told his story. The threatening creditor. Men with broken knuckles and short patience. They knew Seraphine's name, knew where her parents lived. He ran because staying meant putting her in danger. He wrote to Caspian, begging him to protect her. Marrying her had been Caspian's idea, not Aldrich's request. "And now?" Seraphine asked. "What has changed?" Caspian paid them, every last penny, quietly, completely, without telling me. Aldrich shook his head. "He always does that. Fixes everything." "Because gratitude from you is meaningless," Seraphine said, and the coldness in her own voice surprised her. "You would thank him and then create the next disaster. That is the pattern, Aldrich. Everyone can see it except you." "I loved you," Aldrich said softly. "I still love you. You loved the idea of me, the girl from the draper's shop who looked at you like you were extraordinary, the girl who made you feel like a hero without requiring you to actually be one." She stood. "I cannot think with you here. I cannot feel what I actually feel when you are sitting in front of me, being charming and sad and sorry, because that is what you do, Aldrich. You make people feel things that serve your purposes, and I cannot afford to be manipulated right now. Not when everything I am building depends on clarity." She turned and walked out, past Caspian, up the stairs, and into her suite, where she closed the door and pressed her back against it and slid to the floor. The tears came then, not for Aldrich, not for the life she had lost, for the horrible, clarifying truth that Lisette had helped her see. She was not afraid of Aldrich. She was afraid of losing Caspian. And Aldrich's presence in this house was a bomb thrown into the middle of something fragile and new and terrifyingly real. Downstairs, she heard voices. Caspian's, low and lethal. Aldrich's, defensive and rising. Lisette's, cutting through both with the precision of a surgical blade. Then the front door opened and closed. Then silence. An hour later, a note slid under her door. She recognized Caspian's handwriting, precise and spare and achingly familiar. "He's gone. He will not return without your permission. I have arranged for him to stay at the inn in the village until further notice. Whatever you decide, whatever you feel, I will respect it. I made you a promise at the altar. I will fix this. I intend to keep it. Yours, East." Seraphine held the note to her chest and understood, with the force of a wave breaking against shore, that she was in love with the Duke of Thornhaven. Not the brother she was meant to marry, the one who had claimed her at the altar. The silent, guarded, broken man who fixed everything and asked for nothing, and gave her poetry in green leather because he did not know how to say what the poem said for him. She was in love with Caspian, and she had absolutely no idea what to do about it. 2 days passed in a strange, suspended quiet. Seraphine did not go to the library. She could not face it, could not sit in that chair and pretend that the margin note had been anything less than what it was. A confession, an invitation, a door she had opened without knowing what waited on the other side. Caspian did not seek her out, but the evidence of his attention was everywhere. Fresh flowers appeared in her sitting room each morning, not the showy arrangements that decorated the rest of Thornhaven, but small, careful clusters of wildflowers that looked as though someone had walked the grounds at dawn and picked them by hand. A book appeared on her writing desk, a volume on the history of watchmaking, with a note tucked inside in his precise script. For your father, if you think he would enjoy it. The kitchen began producing the specific blackberry preserves she had mentioned once, weeks ago, in passing, during a conversation she had assumed he wasn't listening to. He was always listening. She understood that now. Caspian Ashcroft did not perform attention the way his brother did, loudly and lavishly, and impossible to miss. He performed it in silence, in the margins, in the spaces between words. On the third morning, Lisette appeared at breakfast with a sealed envelope and a face like thunder. "Aldrich has written to the London papers," she said, placing the envelope on the table with the controlled violence of someone setting down a grenade. "He has given an interview to the Gazette. The story will run tomorrow." Seraphine's blood went cold. What kind of interview? The kind where a charming young man tells a sympathetic journalist that he was forced abroad by threats to his family, that his beloved fiancée was stolen by his own brother in his absence, and that he has returned to reclaim the woman he loves. Lisette's voice was acid. He has positioned himself as the romantic hero and Caspian as the villain. The papers will adore it. Society will devour it. And everything we have built since the wedding will be reduced to rubble. Seraphine stood so abruptly her chair toppled backward. "Where is Caspian?" "In his study. He received an advance copy an hour ago." She was moving before Lisette finished the sentence. Down the corridor, past the portraits and the marble busts, to the heavy oak door of Caspian's study. She knocked once, hard. "Come in." He was standing by the window, the newspaper proof in his hand, his expression rigid and unreadable. He did not look at her when she entered. His gaze was fixed on the gardens, but she could tell he was not seeing them. He was seeing something much further away. "You have heard," he said. "Lisette told me." "Then you understand the situation. By tomorrow morning, every drawing room in London will believe I married you against your will, that I took advantage of my brother's absence to claim his fiancée, that I am the cold, calculating duke who stole what belonged to someone else." He set the newspaper proof on his desk with mechanical precision. "The narrative is perfectly constructed. Aldrich was always better at stories than I was. It is not true. Truth is irrelevant in society. Perception is everything. And Aldrich's version is more compelling than mine. The charming brother driven abroad by danger, returning to find his love married to the villain. It writes itself. Stop." Seraphine crossed the room and stood directly in front of him, forcing him to look at her. "Stop retreating. Stop analyzing. Stop calculating damage and managing outcomes and treating this like another mess to clean up. That is precisely what it is." "No, it is not." Her voice shook, but she held his gaze. "This is not about reputation or perception or the London papers. This is about us, about what is real. And I need to know, right now, before everything falls apart, whether what happened in that library was real." His mask cracked. She watched it happen in real time, the careful architecture of control fracturing along lines she had spent weeks learning to read. His jaw loosened. His shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch, and his eyes, those gray, guarded winter river eyes, filled with something she had never seen in them before. Fear. "Everything in that library was real," he said, and his voice was rough in a way that made her chest ache. "Every evening, every conversation, every word of poetry I listened to with my eyes closed, because looking at you while you read made it impossible to pretend I did not feel what I feel. And what do you feel?" He reached for her, then stopped, his hand hovering in the space between them, as though crossing that final distance was the most terrifying thing he had ever contemplated. "I feel like I have been living in a house full of ghosts," he said slowly. "My father's ghost. My mother's ghost. The ghost of the person I was before I learned that love is just another word for something that can be taken away. He swallowed. And then you arrived, in a borrowed wedding gown, furious and frightened, and braver than anyone I have ever known. And the ghosts started to quiet. Not because you made me forget them, but because you made me want to be alive enough to carry them properly. A tear slipped down Seraphine's cheek. She did not wipe it away. I love you, Caspian said. The words came out like they had been locked behind a door for a very long time and had finally broken through. I love you, and I am terrified, because my brother loved you first, and he is out there right now, telling the world a story that makes me the villain, and some part of me believes he might be right, that I took something that was not mine, that I do not deserve this. You did not take me. Seraphine closed the distance between them and pressed her palm against his chest, feeling the hammering of his heart beneath the starched white of his shirt. I chose you. Not at the altar. That was survival. But every night in that library, every conversation, every time I read aloud and watched you find peace. I was choosing you, Caspian. I just did not have the courage to say it. And Aldrich? Aldrich is a beautiful story, I believed, because I did not know what real felt like. You are real. This is real, and I am not going to let him take it away. Caspian's hand found hers, pressed against his chest. His fingers laced through hers, and the grip was fierce and trembling, and nothing like the controlled, careful man the world thought he was. He will destroy our reputation, Caspian said. Then we rebuild it. Society will take his side. Then we outlast them. My grandmother will say I told you so. Despite everything, Seraphine laughed. It was watery and unsteady, but it was real, and the sound of it did something extraordinary to Caspian's face. He smiled. Not the fractional, almost invisible movement she had glimpsed in the library weeks ago. A real smile, unguarded, transformative. The kind of smile that remade his entire face and revealed the man his father had known, the man who had been buried under grief and duty, and the relentless weight of being needed by everyone and loved by no one. Let her, Seraphine whispered. He kissed her. Not at the temple, not a ghost of contact, not a performance for 300 witnesses. He kissed her mouth, softly at first, then with an urgency that said he had been wanting to do this for weeks and had run out of reasons not to. His hands cupped her face, her fingers gripped his lapels, and the study, the newspaper proof, the scandal, the brother, the watching world, all of it fell away. When they finally broke apart, breathless and shaking, Caspian rested his forehead against hers. What do we do now? He murmured. We tell the truth. Our truth. Not Aldrich's version, not the paper's version. Ours. The Sinclair Gala is in 3 days. Every person who matters will be there. Then we tell them there. He pulled back, studying her face. You are proposing that we walk into the largest social event of the season, in the middle of a public scandal, and declare ourselves. I am proposing that we stop hiding, that we stop treating this marriage like damage control and start treating it like what it actually is. And what is it? She smiled. A love story. One that started badly and got messy in the middle. But a love story nonetheless. Caspian looked at her for a long time. Then he nodded, and she saw something settle in his expression. Not resignation. Resolution. The look of a man who had finally decided to stop surviving and start choosing. Then we had better inform my grandmother, he said. She will want to plan our entrance. They found Lisette in the morning room, already drafting letters. Took you long enough, the dowager said without looking up. I have already sent word to Madame Renaud. You will need a new gown. You knew? Seraphine asked. I have known since the night you read him poetry, and he stopped pacing. His father did the same thing. Found a woman too stubborn to let him hide, and loved her for it. And Aldrich's article? Caspian asked. Let him publish. By the time the Sinclair Gala is over, his story will be yesterday's gossip. Lisette picked up her pen again. Now, sit down, both of you. We have a great deal of work to do. The Sinclair Gala was the social event of the year. Every window blazed. The cream of English society gathered beneath crystal chandeliers, buzzing with the scandal from that morning's Gazette. Seraphine stood at the top of the grand staircase in a gown of deep crimson silk. Not blue, not cream, not any of the soft, safe colors Madame Renaud had initially suggested. Crimson, bold as a declaration, the color of a woman who was done apologizing for taking up space. Ready, Caspian murmured beside her. Not remotely, but I am doing it anyway. They descended together. The whispers hit them like weather. She saw the curious, the hostile, and the gleeful. She saw Lady Philippa in gold. She saw Aldrich standing near the entrance, conspicuously alone, dressed in dove gray, the picture of the wronged romantic hero. She looked at him, and she felt nothing. Just the quiet, settled certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. Caspian led her to the center of the ballroom. No one was dancing. Everyone was watching. I would like to address a matter, Caspian said, his voice pitched to carry across the silent room. This morning's Gazette contained a story about my marriage, a romantic tale of a charming brother driven abroad by danger, returning to find his fiancée claimed by a villain. It is a compelling narrative. It is also a lie. He told the truth. Aldrich's debts, his flight, Caspian's decision to protect the woman his brother had abandoned. But I will not pretend. That duty was my only motive. He turned to face her, and the rawness in his expression made the entire ballroom hold its breath. Somewhere between the arrangement and the reality, I fell in love with my wife, her courage, her honesty, her refusal to let me hide behind my walls. His voice dropped, but in the crystal silence, every word was audible. I spent a long time believing that feeling nothing was the safest way to survive. Seraphine taught me that survival is not enough, that living requires the courage to love even when love is terrifying, even when it might be taken away. He looked at her, and his eyes were no longer iron or winter or storms. They were clear, open, alive. I choose her, not because it is convenient or strategic or expected, because she is the bravest person I have ever known, and I would rather face 1,000 scandals with her than spend one more day in a silent house without her. Seraphine's vision blurred with tears. She gripped his hand, feeling the tremor in his fingers, the courage it cost him to stand in front of every person who mattered and strip himself bare. You absolute fool, she whispered, smiling through her tears. You were never supposed to be this romantic. Blame persuasion, he said. You read it to me, and apparently it took. She kissed him. Right there, in the center of the Sinclair Gala, in front of 500 witnesses. Both hands on his face, tears on her cheeks, and the ballroom erupted. Some applauded. Some gasped. Lady Philippa turned on her heel and disappeared. And Aldrich, standing alone by the entrance, watched with an expression that was, for once in his life, completely unperformed. Pain, real, unvarnished, earned pain. He turned and walked out of the ballroom without a word. No one followed him. Lisette appeared at the edge of the dance floor, leaning on her silver cane. Her expression was complicated, layers of pride and exasperation, and something she would deny to her dying day, which was the unmistakable gleam of tears. Well, she said briskly, rapping her cane once against the marble. I suppose I will have to find Lady Philippa another duke. This one is clearly spoken for." She nodded once at Seraphine. Just once. But it carried the weight of everything she could not say aloud. "Welcome to the family. For real, this time." "Dance with me," Caspian said. "Not for the audience. For us." She took his hand, and they danced. 1 year later, Seraphine stood in the conservatory of Thornhaven Hall, her hands deep in soil, and a satisfaction in her chest that she had never imagined possible. The conservatory had been her project.
She had found Caspian's mother's journals in the library, detailed notes on every plant, every cutting, and she had decided to bring them back. Some plants were beyond saving. Others had survived against all odds, clinging to life in cracked pots with dried soil, refusing to die simply because no one had told them they were allowed to. Resilient things, it turned out, just needed someone to notice they were still alive. Caspian appeared in the doorway, his jacket removed, his shirt sleeves rolled to the elbows, looking nothing like the guarded, untouchable duke she had married 1 year ago. "You have soil on your nose," he observed. "You have ink on your collar." Fair point. He crossed the conservatory and kissed her forehead, lingering there for a moment, in the way she had come to recognize as his version of saying, "I love you too much for words." "Something came for you today," he said, producing a letter from his pocket. "From Aldrich." Seraphine wiped her hands on her apron and took it. Aldrich's letters arrived every few months now, from various corners of the continent. They were shorter than his first missive, less dramatic, more honest. He was working, he said, actual work, helping manage a vineyard in the south of France. He was paying back what he could. He was learning what it meant to build something rather than borrow it. She opened this one and read it standing among the resurrected plants of a woman she had never met, but felt she knew intimately. "Dear Seraphine, I am beginning to understand that what I felt for you was not love so much as need, and need dressed up as love is a dangerous thing. My brother is a better man than I am. I have always known this. He was happier in the last letter he wrote me than I have ever known him to be. You did that. I am not ready to come home yet, but when I do, I hope there will be a place for me. Not at the center. Somewhere on the edges, where I can watch the family I almost destroyed learn to be whole again. Your brother-in-law, and your friend, if you will have me, Aldrich." Seraphine folded the letter and tucked it into her apron pocket. "Well?" Caspian asked, his expression carefully neutral in the way she now found endearing rather than infuriating. "He is growing up. About time. He says you are happier than he has ever known you to be." She stepped close, wrapping her arms around his waist. "Are you?" Caspian looked down at her, and the smile came easily now. Not the fractional, barely visible movement of a year ago. A real smile, warm and unguarded. The smile of a man who had stopped pacing at night because the house was no longer silent. "My wife has soil on her nose and is asking me emotional questions among my mother's orchids," he said. "I am not sure happy is a sufficient word. What word would you use?" He considered, the way he considered everything, carefully and thoroughly, and with more depth than the question required. "Present," he said finally. "I would say, I am finally present." She kissed him among the orchids and the foxgloves and the resilient, stubborn plants that had refused to die, and she thought of the cathedral where it had all begun, the organ music faltering, the wrong brother at the altar, the choice she had made with shaking hands and a heart full of terror. She had taken Caspian's hand because she had no other option. She had kept holding it because she discovered that the silent Duke, the closed-off, grief-stricken, emotionally unavailable man, the world dismissed as cold,
was the most extraordinary person she had ever known, and he had kept holding hers because she had taught him that silence is not safety, that walls are not protection, that the bravest thing a person can do is let someone in and trust that they will stay. Later that evening, in the library, Seraphine settled into her chair with the slim green volume of poetry. Caspian sat across from her. No ledgers this time, just a glass of wine, and the particular quality of attention he gave only to her. "Read to me," he said. She opened the book to the poem about the difference between being alone by circumstance and being alone by choice. Her handwriting was still there in the margin, the question she had written on the worst night of their marriage. "I choose not to be alone. Do you?" Beneath it, in Caspian's precise, careful hand, was a response she had never seen before. He must have written it that night, the night the pacing stopped, the night he read her words and made his decision. 2 words. "I choose you." Seraphine looked up at him, her eyes bright. "How long has that been there?" "Since the night you wrote yours. You never told me." "I was waiting for the right moment." His gray eyes held hers, and they were warm now, always warm when they looked at her. "This seems like the right moment." She laughed, and he smiled, and she began to read aloud, her voice filling the room that had once been silent and was now, finally, irrevocably, alive. And in the conservatory, where Caspian's mother's orchids bloomed in colors no one had seen in 15 years, a single foxglove stretched toward the glass ceiling, reaching for the light the way all resilient things do. Not because someone told it to grow, because someone finally gave it a reason. Thank you for being here. You are the reason these stories come to life, because you believe in love that is earned, not easy. In characters who choose courage when everything tells them to hide. In endings that are not fairy tales, but something better. Something real and hard, won and worth every painful, beautiful step. Your presence here matters more than you know. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something true, consider subscribing. There are more stories like this one, stories of love that chooses the difficult path, of people who learn that the bravest thing they can do is let someone in. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. And thank you for believing that silence is never the end of the story. It is just the space before someone speaks.